Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest sessions series. John, brilliant to have you here. And to start with, please introduce yourself to everybody and let people know what it is you do.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to be with you, and I think it's going to be fun from what I've just discovered. Yes, my name is John McConnell. I used to be a prison governor many years ago. I did that for about 10 years. And then I think because of my values, I changed and became a social worker because I've always wanted to improve the world, make things better, and in particular, empower individuals to change their lives for the better. And it became impossible to do that in the prison service. And so I moved on and retrained as a social worker. Did that for about 16 years. And then I took early retirement so I could spend more time working with an organization called the Brahma Kumaris, which is like a worldwide spiritual university. Started in India back in the 30s and now is worldwide with centers all in 120 different countries. And the values, again, it keeps coming back to values already. The values of that organization fitted in perfectly with mine because it's all about self-transformation and through that changing the world. And we do that really by remembering who we really are. So we've got a physical body, we've got all our different roles. You know, we can look at each other in terms of gender or race or religion and things like that, but they're all rather superficial. They cause lots of problems in the world because we've all forgotten that beneath that exterior, there is a spiritual being or a soul. And that used to be completely non-controversial until relatively recently when science took over and more or less reduced us to the status of an advanced ape with no real meaning and purpose to life. And one shot and off you go back to the earth, and that's the end of it. So for me, it was very liberating to come across the organization and its values. And in particular, the one which I think makes the biggest difference is recognizing that originally, as a spiritual being, when we come on this earth, we're full of peace and love and happiness and pure positive energy. We're not born in a state of sin, as the West would have us believe. We're not sinners who have to be saved. We don't have to be repressed and controlled and ruled by fear, which is all connected with the patriarchal approach to life. We're actually the opposite of that, and we need to be bringing out the goodness and expressing it naturally and easily, you know, through our thoughts, words, and actions. So once you get into those sorts of inner values, which are, you know, the real thing, as it were, and are responsible for all the good things in the world, then your life changes. And it's all really been thoroughly researched. So many years ago, we did a project on vision of a better world. We asked people all around the world what sort of world they would like to live in. And regardless of the culture, regardless of the country or the political regime, everyone wanted the same things. They wanted security, they wanted peace, they wanted a nice home, they wanted a lovely environment, they wanted a meaningful job to do, etc., etc. And yeah, we put all that in a book, which went to the United Nations and that, and was, you know, widely accepted. And then the next question was, if we all want this like heaven on earth, how are we going to get it? And the answer is by reconnecting with our inner values. And so we wrote a book called Living Our Values, an inside-out approach to change your world for the better. And on this image here, at the front there, you can see like a little point of light or energy, which represents the light of the soul. And then there's the box of limitations in which we've been confined. And now it's a case of breaking out of that box and fulfilling our true meaning and purpose. So that's a brief resume. But everything we do is free of charge. And you can either look up the Brahma Kumaris. Globalcooperationhouse.org is probably a good place to start, because I'm based in London and we do lots of free activities. Everything's free of charge. We've got a beautiful retreat centre in Oxford that people can go to. And our main course is the Raj Yoga meditation course, in which everybody gets an overall view of everything, which really makes a big difference. So there we go.
That's a
Hope that
great.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and well, it just struck me as you were describing it as, isn't this so simple? And to think that we have so many challenges dealing with our world and our lives and all the rest of it, but when you break it down as you did, it seems supremely simple, actually.
Yes, but we've complicated everything. This is the challenge, partly through science, partly through technology, and partly through being taken over by, capitalism in its different forms.
Yeah.
Which is based on the opposite of everything I've just been talking about. It's all about competition, fighting, dog eats dog and the top dog wins. And everything around us comes from that, the homelessness, the inflation, the desecration of the environment. Everything's been sacrificed on the altar of profit and greed. And we can see that the billionaires are increasing and the rest of us are getting poorer and poorer. And, you might say that's being political, but I don't think it is, actually. It's just stating an obvious truth, which is connected with spirituality and values.
Yeah. I saw a post on LinkedIn this week that basically painted a picture of the world through different lenses. So it was, for instance, it talked about what percentage of the global population speaks different languages, for instance, where in the world people live, whether people live in cities or in more rural environments, whether they have housing or whether they don't. The number of people that don't have access to clean water, don't have access to education, all of this sort of stuff. And I responded to the lady because she listed the information, and I just said this would make a brilliant infographic if you know anybody that could do that. And she, by coincidence, she does, so she's going to do that. But in the note, I also added, in a world where we do have enough resources for everybody to have a life that they can live with dignity and have the basics, why do we do this to each other? It's like, what's that all about? It's weird.
Mm. And we have unlimited funds for war, don't we?
Yeah,
Nobody else says we can't afford a war, we can't afford more nuclear weapons, we can't afford more drones. But sorry, we've got to keep the two-child benefit cap, because we can't afford to feed our children. I mean, if you look at it objectively, the whole thing is outrageous,
agreed.
totally outrageous.
Agreed. Well, on that note of outrage, we'll choose a values jam card. I'm going to tip out the cards now. How many
Okay.
piles would you like me to make in front of me, John?
2 piles, please.
Just two. Okay, I'll make them different sizes. So would you like the left pile or the right pile?
Well, as I'm left-handed, I'll have the left pile, please.
Okay. Now, I've got a lot of cards here, so I'm guessing, give me a number between 1 and 30.
9.
9.
Number 9, yeah.
Okay, so let's see what we make of this.
Inclusion.
Inclusion.
Wow.
And the first question is this: what does inclusion mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Hmm. Right. Well, inclusion means there's no exclusion. So it means we're all, I mean, it fits in, very well with the spiritual perspective, because if we're all souls, then, and not just the body, etc., then that takes you beyond all these differences and labels by which we actually exclude people. All this wokeism and that, playing one group off against another, it's all due to trying to create disunity and distraction. Whereas if you think of us all as the same, then how can you start discriminating against anybody? Because you haven't got any grounds on which to do it, because we're all human beings or we're all souls. Therefore, how can I say I'm having more money than you, or I don't like you, because we're all on one level connected as like a global family. So for me, it means we're all equal. We're all worthy of respect. We're all worthy of being treated the same, regardless of our social status. So the homeless guy sitting outside the supermarket deserves just as much respect as somebody driving by in their Rolls Royce or whatever the latest car is. A Tesla probably now, isn't it? But I'm showing my age with the Rolls Royces.
I'm fascinated by how you've opened this conversation, John, because inclusion is kind of in the workplace. It's become very trendy, right? Diversity and inclusion to be seen to be doing the right thing in that space has become something that organizations are striving to show that they're doing the right thing in that space, or being seen as, or pretending to. But one of the one of the problems that I have seen with this approach plays to what you were saying, in that it almost reinforces division. Because, so let me give you a hypothetical example of, and you can imagine an organization being like this. We don't have enough senior women in the organization. So what we're going to do is set up a women's networking group. And what we will do is have a calendar of events that will only be attended by women. And we'll invite speakers to come in and talk to them. And by that, they will develop their network, and maybe they will be able to advance their careers better. And what often happens is that the job of that event calendar is delegated to somebody pretty junior in the organization. And the senior people that have sponsored the program initially remove themselves from it and aren't very much involved at all. And then when the events happen, the women complain about the men in the organization, and it becomes that kind of conversation. And on the other side, the men question why the women should have a women's networking group, and it all becomes very divisive. And if only instead of that, the organization said, we don't care who you are, what your background is, you belong to our organization. We want you to live the organizational values, and we're going to champion those people that live up to those values. Wouldn't that be a kind of a better way to get everybody moving in the same direction?
Yes, absolutely. Because values can unite people, can't they? But the thing is, you have to agree on them. And then when you say organizational values, alarm bells start ringing for me, because organizational values aren't the same as personal values.
Yeah, agreed.
And, the number one organizational value for many companies is to make profit,
Yeah,
regardless of the consequences.
yeah,
And if that means, screwing the workers to get as much time and energy out of them for the minimum price, or if it means, lying and cheating, on the stock market to make your shares, appear to be of more value than they are, then, I'm afraid it's not going to work. So it has to be proper values, which everyone owns and accepts from the bottom up.
Yeah.
You can't impose them on people. You've got to nurture them and bring them out of people. Unless you can impose, we're just going to make a profit and we don't care how we treat you or what you do. And there's loads of examples of that, isn't there? People to please their boss, they've gone and gambled on the stocks and shares and made a disaster, and the company's nearly collapsed, because of all the bad investments or the trickery or the hypocrisy. Sorry, am I being a bit too critical and radical
I'm,
for
I'm
you?
not, I'm not sure you are, John. I think that in what you've described is perhaps I suppose it's the stereotypical bad organization, isn't it? And of course, not all organizations are like that, but
No,
many
I'm not
of them,
suggesting they're all like that at all.
yeah,
There's another group who are values based and who are different. They're the ones that will survive. But, if you look at, what's happening with X and all the rest of it, all the manipulation that's going on there, and that was seen as a good business, and it's still making money. But, what's it doing to people's lives? What's it doing to their minds? What's it doing to society?
yeah,
You can't divorce these things.
yeah.
They're all
It's,
interconnected.
you remind just now
Again, it's
when you
part
were,
of the inclusion. A company is part of the whole environment. It's not exclusive to itself. It's got to consider the, environmental issues, human issues, etc., etc. And if
mm,
you don't, then eventually companies like that will collapse. They
mm,
have to,
mm,
because there's no real truth in them, if you like. There's no real genuine values,
mhm.
all external materialistic values.
You're making me think about how we often regard inclusion almost from a hierarchical perspective. So, when I was talking about that organization and its efforts in the area of diversity and inclusion, it's kind of we are going to include, so hierarchy. I'm senior and I'm going to include these people. Whereas what you've just talked about there with organizations being part of the whole, the inclusion actually continues upwards as well as downwards, if you get what I mean.
And
So,
across, it's
yes,
everywhere, really.
yeah.
It has to be.
So it's this much bigger picture of inclusion than just looking down. Um, that's interesting. And what
And you
about the
see, at the moment, the society is based on me rather than
yeah,
we.
yeah,
It's all about me. It's about my company. It's about my needs. It's about me making lots of money, and it pervades everything. People don't want to pay their taxes. Doesn't matter whether you're super rich or you're relatively poor. If you can get away without paying your tax, you're seen as okay. Well, then how do we pay for all the things we're wanting? We've got to go from me to we.
yeah.
And we used to be we after the war in particular. I'm very lucky. I'm a product of, the all the reforms which came in after the war. When you had free schools, free education, free school meals, etc., free universities, everything was free, and everybody, there was a much better graduated system of taxation, and the rich paid up to 90%
Mhm,
of their wealth eventually. And that consensus lasted a long time because of that we consciousness which came out of the war when everybody came together and had to fight for the greater good.
mm,
And then it all changed and it switched from we to me, and how much money can I grab and how much money can I save from the taxpayer, from the taxman or woman. I have to say, by the way, these are my views. Don't think the Brahma Kumaris is, or I'm typical of Brahma Kumaris. We're all armchair revolutionaries. So I have to say that because some people, might think we're a secret subversive organization trying to undermine the system. But
John, you just mentioned the word system there, and when you were talking about you being a byproduct of what happened after the war, it strikes me that it's not easy to make changes to a system when it's become so entrenched. And just to give you an example, recently I'm on a kind of neighborhood app that I'm not very active on it, but I just have a look at it every now and again. And there was a post on there about it was some months ago now, actually. It was about a group of youths in a fast food outlet with their bikes, banging into people, knocking things off of tables, just causing a nuisance, right? And when I read it, I just remember thinking back to COVID and lockdown and our government leaders having parties and the like. And intuitively, I just made an instant connection. Should we be surprised that people are behaving badly in society when the role model that they have just sets such a bad example? But when it gets to that level, it strikes me that it's a real challenge to do something about it.
Yes, it is definitely. Um,
So you would say that that starts from within, is that right?
well, everything outside is a reflection of what's going on inside, isn't it? So if I'm feeling angry and frustrated, and if I feel ignored or deprived in some way or another, or I'm not valued, and let's face it, a lot of people are not valued. 0-hour contracts means we don't value you at all. You're
Yeah,
just a labor product.
yeah,
And if we don't have to pay any sickness benefit, if we don't have to care for you at all, that's great because there's more money for us
yeah,
and we don't care what happens to you. If your daily message is that, you're going to build up resentment and anger and things like that, and it will express itself. In
yeah,
terms of those young people, they're probably frustrated and bored because they've got nothing to do. Half of them probably know they're not going to go to university, and if you don't go to university, then you're rubbish. Because we expect at least 50% of children to go to university. That's the aim. And so you're a failure from the start because of the system that we've created. So, um, that's not to say, people are still responsible for themselves. So those young people are still responsible for how they handle their feelings, but they need support in finding more productive ways of doing that.
yeah.
And
And
through
it would
engagement and dialogue and youth clubs. We don't have any youth clubs anymore, hardly
agree.
any.
Yeah,
The green spaces are houses being built, on them. Um, so what do you expect? I mean,
yeah,
we've lost our common sense,
yeah.
really.
And we do come back to this word of inclusion, don't we? Because um, those young guys causing trouble in that shop, imagine that, like you've said, they don't do very well at school. Maybe they are third generation unemployed, for instance, their parents. And so they don't, that's their paradigm. They have no hope. And so when you put people in that sort of situation, it's kind of a bit ignorant, I think, to expect them to be anything other than pissed off and for that to express itself. It's a bit grandiose to be saying, oh, people shouldn't behave badly. Well, no, of course they shouldn't. But if you put people in a certain environment and conditions, you will get a reaction.
Yes, you will. I mean, like when I was a prison governor, there were um, two ways of running the prison. And I had a very good example, where I was, we opened up a new prison for young offenders. And the governor, he loved people basically, and he went into the job to empower them and help them. And together we created this amazing environment where the young people were given, good education. They were going out to local colleges. They were those who didn't have any parents or friends. They were adopted by people in the community, and the institution became part of the community with the flow of people going in and out. It worked perfectly, and it fitted in with the rehabilitation model.
Yeah.
And then that governor left, and then the more of the punitive, because it's either punishment or rehabilitation. This is why the prison service is always in a state of confusion, doesn't know what it's really doing. And the other guy came in, snapping and snarling, stand to attention, I'm the governor, just listen to me. The whole place changed overnight.
Yeah.
And everyone became scared and anxious. There were fights, there was arguments, there was, all sorts of things. Because, you create the environment through your own vision or your own attitude or your own approach. And if you've got the power, that will have an impact on others. You can say, well, right, well, they shouldn't react to that. And we would say, ideally, if we go inside ourselves and connect with our peace, then we will be able to deal with all of those things, in a positive and proactive way. And that's true. But then if you're not in a situation to learn about that or to practice it, you're going to react in that other external way. And we see it all over the world, don't we, really?
Yeah.
It's
And
there's
you've reminded me, John, of I did a values project with a prison, and this came about because the governor had read something I'd written and wanted to do a project for the prison officers. So in a meeting, I remember we were talking about this, and I just asked the question if there were people involved in delivering the prison service to the people serving their time that were not prison officers, because I wasn't really familiar with the delivery model. And they said, yeah, sure, of course there are. There's, kitchen people in the kitchen, and people that do the cleaning, and in the pharmacy, and then fitness, all of these sorts of people. So I suggested that they should be included as well, so that we had this community of people that were involved in providing the service to the people that were serving their time, as one community. And they thought that was a great idea. So then I got a bit braver, and I remember I just said, what about if we involve the men as well, the guys that are serving their time? And they agreed that. And so as a result, we did co-creation workshops, which had the men who were serving their time and members of staff in the same working session. And I know this is a gross generalization, but I have to say, the guys who were serving their time added so much more value than the people that were looking after them in these workshops. So this is just a really small example of the benefit you can get back when you just include people.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I mean, it's like that, the appreciative inquiry model,
Yeah.
which is used a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you get everybody in the whole organization from different levels all together, to create what would be, a wonderful way of delivering our goods or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then everybody owns the values because they're coming from their own space and they've contributed. It's so much better than this, down approach.
Yeah, totally agree. And also, I mean, I think it's linked to the point that I just made about those people that were serving their time. But sometimes people in a, let's say, less senior or junior position might have more lived experience than the people in the more senior jobs. So again, let me just exaggerate the point, just to make the point. Imagine somebody who is, let's say, on the cleaning team, and perhaps they have arrived in this country from another country. Perhaps they didn't speak the language in this country when they first arrived, and they've had to deal with that. Perhaps they've got two jobs going at the same time and they have to deal with all of that. Perhaps they've got children that they have to look after at the same time. And then you compare that with somebody who might be the finance director, who went to public school and then through great networking of their parents managed to get a good job and got promoted very quickly and all of a sudden is in this very senior role. Now, those two people could be sitting on the same table, but the first person can often add much more value to the conversation than the other person.
Yes. Yeah, they've been through a lot more actually, in different ways, haven't they? And they've got a lot of, quite often, a lot of wisdom, based on that experience that they've had. Yeah, and it can help a lot actually. Yeah. See,
And
that's seeing different people, that's seeing people as equals, isn't it? You see, there's got to be that mutual respect, otherwise it won't work.
yeah,
If,
yeah.
if you're there sitting, or he's rubbish, really, and I'm just tolerating his opinions, but I don't really want to listen to them, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, agreed. So it's this putting value on lived experience versus professional expertise or whatever you want to describe it as. And
Mm.
also magical things can happen. I remember running another workshop in an office where a member of the cleaning team was with a member of the engineering team. And then I heard about 2 weeks later, an engineer had been doing some work on the ceiling and there was a load of mess on the floor. And the normal way to deal with that is that you place a job on the help desk and it gets reported to the cleaning team and they send somebody and all of this sort of stuff. But because of that interaction of those two people, the lady from the cleaning team walked past and said, "Don't bother phoning it in, I'll just clean it up." So you get that sort of cooperation that happens because you've had an interaction which has been on a level like you described. And it's not, oh, you're an engineer and you're paid more than me and I'm not as good as you. It's just two human beings working in the same environment and wanting to help each other, which
Yeah,
is, I think, plays to what you mentioned right at the beginning about how we arrive in this world with good intention.
yes, definitely.
Now let's have a more specific question. I've loved how we've started this, but let's now get very nitty-gritty. So, um, where have you noticed exclusion, John?
Where or when or where? I mean, well, it's around us in so many ways, isn't it? I think. Um, Walking past, a homeless man without saying hello, is a form of exclusion. You pretend they don't exist. You don't have to give money every time. I mean, I don't. I never give money, but I might give food. And in fact, I mean, I've ended up getting to know one particular homeless person very well because I was attracted by his dignity. He just sat there. He didn't complain. And he just, yeah, had something special about him. And sometimes, I said, would you like something to eat or drink? And sometimes he'd say, no, thank you. I've got enough. And eventually, we've got quite a good relationship, and he's told me his life story, which is amazing, and he is driven by a passion to be a physicist, even though I think he's 40 now, but his father was a professor of physics in Bulgaria, and
Right.
he's got that love for physics, but his life sort of, went a bit astray. Um, so I think actually it's all around. It's the way, if you bump into somebody, do you apologize? and say, I'm sorry. Now, it happened the other day with with someone I know who he didn't mean it. He walked past a black lady and his bag, just his
Oh,
rucksack just
yeah.
brushed against her, and he walked on. He didn't even notice that he'd done it. And I was walking a few yards behind this person, and I just saw her look up, with a look of pain on her face, as if, oh, well, that's another person who's just dismissed me. So actually, it's all around. And it's not necessarily that way. It can be other ways as well. You may dismiss somebody because they're rich and successful and you're jealous of them and you ignore them, It's not all about the poor. I mean, it can happen on all levels, can't it? And the one, which is the religious discrimination, I find that very painful on one level that, you know, and the image which has been created in this country quite often of Muslims, and, where I live, there's lots of Muslims in the area. And actually, I would say all the ones I've met are lovely people. They're humble, they're kind, they're generous. They've actually still got some religious principles. They do go to the mosque, they do bow down in front of God. They're part of a bigger system and they share and care for each other. They don't all want their own house by themselves. I mean, a lot of where I live, there are lots of big houses and there's 2 or 3 families living in them. They may have a big car outside, but that's because they don't have a mortgage, because, maybe the father's paying the mortgage and the kids are growing up and are living there. There are so many other ways of living which are better than ours. The Indian community is the same. And Muslims never borrow money. It's against their religion. It was against our religion until, Calvinism and that. And they will collectively come together. They will give people money to set up a business. And then when it's successful, the people will pay it back. It's a totally different way of living and being. And I think we're driven by ego, that we're the best. Our way of living is the best, and we exclude everyone who doesn't fit into that.
Yeah. And
It's
there's some
happening on so many levels in the newspapers every day, the labels which are being put on people, the way things are being described. There's a lot of brainwashing and conditioning going on to boost our own little egos, and at the expense of other people who then suffer, like the riots we've had recently. What's all that about? It's about poisonous messages being given to one group who've then taken it out on another group.
yeah. But did you see the story about the imam who was giving out food and drink at the protests?
Yes, and inviting people in to his
Yeah,
mosque.
yeah,
That's the way forward. It's
yeah,
lovely, isn't it? And
it-
all the people, there's far more kind, generous people around than there are the others.
yeah,
But unfortunately, the others, they get the attention, don't they, in a
yeah,
way? I mean, they need to be acknowledged and there needs to be dialogue with them, and their concerns need to be listened to.
yeah,
And it's because they're angry and frustrated. And the role of men, you see, has transformed so much. If you're a traditional working class man, you don't have any meaningful work anymore, quite often,
yeah,
and you haven't got the skills necessarily or the social graces to work in a call center or whatever else is on offer, and you feel completely excluded.
mm. And it
And
also, when you were talking about the Muslim community, it brings me back to what you were saying again right at the beginning here, where I think we too easily label people, because just because somebody is a Muslim doesn't mean to say they are like this, right? They're an individual. I think you used the word soul. So it's not their religion that defines them, right? They are an individual person.
Hmm. Yes, they are. With good values.
Yeah. I don't, is it right that they are obliged to give a percentage of their income away? Am I getting that right or not?
Certainly, I think it's during is it Ramadan or whatever. I mean, I don't know as much as I ought to about them, but they definitely give to charity. And
Right.
again, in the Indian culture is amazing, because that they always give. It's part of their nature to give them some maybe 10% of their income. We used to do it as Christians a long time ago, 10%. I think Christ used to say, give a tithe, 1/10 of your money to others.
Right.
But obviously it depends on what you give it to and why you give it.
Yeah,
So,
the why is the important thing. I saw of it. Does the name Dan Pallotta mean anything to you?
no.
Okay, I'll share something with you
Yeah.
separate, but he talks about charity and where charity came from, and he describes how the Calvinists, when they went to America, decided that they really didn't want to feel so guilty about being so rich, and so decided that they should give some of their money away to charity. But it was really for their benefit, not anybody else's. It was just to make them feel better about themselves. And he goes on to describe how we've got charity all wrong because he gives the example of why is it that we complain that somebody who is heading up a charity which is bringing enormous good in the world receives a decent salary? Why do we complain about that? He says, when we don't complain about somebody earning £1 million, for instance, heading up an organization that brings harm into the world. And he was, it just doesn't make sense.
No, it
You'll
doesn't.
enjoy, it's a TED talk that I'll send you the link to. I think
All
you'll
right.
like it.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, time has flown today, but we do need to bring this Values Jam to a close. And there's always a final question. So, John, from what are you encouraged to do differently about inclusion as a result of our conversation today?
Well, I think I'm more aware of it. I mean, inclusion is part of who I am, I would say. I always go out of my way to befriend people or say hello to people. So, but I'll value the importance of it even more, I think, through the discussion, which I've enjoyed actually. You've asked some good questions, and it's quite stimulating.
Yeah,
And the
I've enjoyed
examples
it
you've
too.
come up with.
What I'm encouraged to do differently is I this conversation has made me realize that inclusion is not just about your own domain, if that's the right word, and it's this idea of thinking of whether it's yourself as an individual or an organization being part of a bigger system. So it's that inclusion upwards is the way I'm thinking of it, actually, rather than downwards. So I'm going to be interested to be thinking about that. And maybe the easiest example is, and you've touched on the environment. We know that we're part of this planet, but we kind of, again, gross generalization, we tend to think that it's ours to use and that we don't need to give anything back, or it's just take, take, take. And that's not an inclusive mentality in the way that I'm starting to think about it now. And if we did think more inclusively on that bigger sense, then perhaps that would help us make better decisions, specifically with regard to the environment.
Hmm.
So, John, you're a qualified values jammer now, so thank you very much for your time.
Well, I think you're doing a brilliant job actually, and you're making values come alive. And I love the spontaneity of the card, you know. Are those cards available? Can people buy them?
Oh, bless you, John. Yes, they are.
Well, I think I'll buy a pack then. Because
So,
they introduce an interesting element of spontaneity. You know, you can't just give a set speech to or a talk
yeah,
to this, can
exactly
you?
that. And so
You
for those people that are watching or listening to this, the website is values-jam.com, and that's where you can order your Values Jam card decks. We know that people love receiving these as a free gift, and passing it forward is a kind of general principle for Values Jam. So I always ask people to consider whether they might order at least one additional deck to give away to somebody as well. So I'll leave that to you to decide. Right. Cheers, John.
Right, bye. Thank you. Take care.